and love people well. We are so glad you're here, and wherever you're listening from, we believe you will be more acquainted with the heartbeat of God through today's message.
Good morning. So, first and foremost, I want to. I know he probably doesn't want the acknowledgement either way. We have an individual in this room who made this by hand, which is amazing. So Kevin, thank you for this. So when he asked me, like, what do you want? I was like, well, what I missed, because what I used to have was this thing I could put my foot on, and I got one, and so it only makes me preach longer. So thank you for that. But yeah, this is amazing. So thankful for. I could not do anything like this. No, it'd fall. Either way, there's two things I'd like to talk about before we get started today. The first thing is we do this thing called Linked Up. It's the first, second, and third Sunday of every month that we encourage anyone who wants to call this place home to go through. And we've stayed committed with that on the first, second, and third Sunday of every month. But I want to let you know that because of September, Labor Day being the first Sunday, we are postponing Linked Up for September, starting it back up in October. But here's what's important. We value this so much that we believe if you call yourself a family member here, if you believe this is your home, if you think that you are part of what we have going on here, you would need to go through this class. It's that vital. Because it explains who we are. It's us putting our cards on the table, you getting to know who we are. So whether you've been coming for a while or you've been visiting for a few weeks, you'd like to go through this class. It will start back up in October. We value it greatly. All right, and so we'll let you know more about that as it comes. The second thing is that I would like to talk about, which is a big deal for us. We do 3 major events throughout the year. We do our end of the school year party. We do breakfast with Santa, and we also do Arts in the Alley. Arts in the Alley is the one thing that we do outside of these walls. We leave the premises and go down to Grove City. If you're familiar with Arts in the Alley, it's a big deal. It's in Grove City. We run the Kids Fun Street. So all the kids that come there come to our section, and we engage with them. They have crafts. And listen, you don't have to be crafty. The crafts are already set out. There's directions. They just do it, and you watch. Here's what we need. We always need volunteers. And so I'm going to say it this way without being too hurtful. If you call yourself a family member here, I'd like to see you out there at some point this weekend, or that weekend, which is the 16th, 17th, 18th, third weekend of September. Serve in some way, some capacity. And we need a lot of help. The way to sign up, you can see someone will be at the Next Steps table in the back. There's also a way to sign up online. They'll walk you through what that looks like. But Nicole is kind of running that, so if you see her, you can just talk to her as well. But it is a very important thing that we do. It's our way. It's our way of engaging our community. Listen, more than anything, and this is why it matters. Like, you can't do crafts. It's okay. All I want is for our community to be loved on by a church within this community. Because what we know is that churches get a bad rep sometimes, in which all churches do is want and take, and if we just show up there and they want and take it. And what I want us to do is to leave here, go to our community, and then when we leave that community, we've left them better than we found them, just by engaging in conversation, right? And so that's what we want. That's Arts in the Alley. Make sense? Yes. Sweet. Few people over here, one here. Okay, good. Glad we're listening. This will get your attention, though. We're doing baptism today. So every time we do baptism, we fight this thing behind me. If you don't know, there is a baptism here. If I walk too far backwards, I fall in it. And here's the thing. Last time we did baptism, it was like a green color. The good news is it's not green. It's brown. It's brown. So I've already listened before. You're like, these guys are crazy. It must be a cult. I've already talked to the people getting baptized. They're all good. We got it filled and it was clear and it wasn't warm. Like when I say not warm, it was ice cold. All right, and I'm like, that's not good. So I got the heater turned on, finally got that working. We came in here this morning, and it was brown. It was the darkest brown I've ever seen. And so we drained it this morning. Thinking we'll refill it. And so we refilled it thinking that it would clear up. And here's what we have concluded. That it's good, clean water. It's just off color. Because we're on a well. And so it's just well water. And so we put in pool shock. It's shocked. It's good to go. It's sanitary. You can drink it. I promise you. It looks like coffee. So that's cool. It is the nectar of the Lord. Anyways, we are doing baptism today. So if while we're doing baptism, you see one of the kids come up here and say, no, and turn around, they still love Jesus, all right? Okay, let's move on. We're going to finish up our message in Hebrews chapter 11 today. We have walked through Hebrews chapter 11 for the last, month and a half. We're going to finish it today. It's called Faith Over Failure. What we have acknowledged and realized is that all of the individuals in Hebrews chapter 11 who walked out in faith also had some pretty hard times. Difficult times. They failed several times. And so what we have realized is that even though we have faith in God, there's going to be moments, significant moments in our lives where that faith is imperfect and we're still going to mess up and fail. And so what do you do with that? What we do with that is we realize that it's not necessarily about our faith, but who our faith is in. And God himself remains faithful even when we don't. And that he secures our unfaithfulness. In fact, he continues to chase us down even in the wilderness, in the desert. And it's a beautiful thing to see. And so before we wrap up Hebrews chapter 11, have you ever had a moment where you wanted to go back to something else? Like you tried something out, you're like, this isn't working for me, and you turn around. Or maybe you tried this new job, it didn't work, you're like, man, it was better back where I was at. The reason why I bring that up is because the book of Hebrews was written to a specific group of people who more than likely used to be Jewish, became Christian, so listened to the gospel message, fell in love with the all-sufficiency of Jesus Christ, walked away from Judaism into what Christ had for them, and started to pursue that life. Well, what happened was, post the resurrection of Jesus Christ, and then throughout the kind of first several years of Christianity, they began to be persecuted. And so this group that is being written to in Hebrews is a group of people who thought, you know what? It's getting difficult. It's getting hard. We're facing a lot of persecution. There's a lot of people out to get us. They're facing floggings and mockings. They're being kicked out of their own community. There are a lot of things that are going down. Keep in mind, this is after Jesus Christ came, died, resurrected, ascended into heaven, sent his Spirit to invade the hearts and minds of believers, yet even the believers started to face an immense amount of persecution. To where they're like, you know what? At least Judaism was accepted. And so they started to turn back. Some of them did turn back. Others were desiring to turn back because they wanted it to be a little easier. Because the reality is, most of the time, when we give our lives over to something, Jesus, maybe we want things to move in a better direction. And if things aren't moving in a better direction, we tend to go back to what we know. So when I was I think it was between my junior and senior year of high school, I met this girl. And this girl was a daughter of a pastor. And I started, like when I met her and we started to date, I'm like, man, you know what? Maybe I can give this thing a try. And here's the thing. What God tends to use in the hearts and minds of teenage boys or girls to get themselves on the right track, right? So this one came along, I'm like, man, she's awesome. And it was probably one of those moments where I was willing to say, you know what? If God can make her, he's awesome. So I'll start to pursue her and him. And that's kind of where I was at. Until I continued in this relationship for a little while. And I had a very heart-wrenching, frustrating conversation with her dad, who was a pastor. And this conversation went so crazy that I walked out of that office thinking, if that is what this thing is about, where God can't take people who have made mistakes and redeem them, where God can't take broken people and restore them, if he's not a God who does that, and he always holds your past failures and sins against you, I want nothing to do with it. So I walked out of his office where he asked me that I could no longer date his daughter, and tell me the reasons why, and he pulled out the Bible and he showed me the reasons why, which were inaccurate and incorrect. I walked away thinking, this is it. It changed the trajectory of my life forevermore. In fact, it was that moment where I decided I do not want to live in Okeechobee, Florida anymore. I'm moving away. And what God did is continue to direct my paths. Even though I wasn't following him, he got me to a Christian college up in Indiana because it was 19 hours away from Okeechobee, Florida. He knew that's exactly where I needed to be, because then at that moment I started to see people my own age authentically in love with Jesus, who made a slew of mistakes, but God's grace was sufficient. And it was in that moment, at that college, that university, that I said, you know what? This God is real. His grace is all sufficient. I'm in. But when I came face to face with what I was told this thing looked like, I wanted to go the other direction. It makes me wonder if other people have experienced such a similar thing, where you try to give Jesus a try, and what ends up happening is it didn't work out for you. Whether it be legalism or whether it be something else, it caused you to say, this isn't it, I'm going back the other direction. Well, I'm here to tell you, you're in a safe place this morning, because the original audience of Hebrews wanted to go back to Judaism. And the writer is imploring to them, Jesus is worth it. It's worth it. And so if you would, we're going to pick up in verse 32. This is what it says. What more shall I say? For time would fail me to tell you of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, or David, and Samuel, and the prophets. Verse 32 is the author wrapping up Hebrews chapter 11 to let us know that all of the names we heard earlier, whether it be Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Rahab, all of these names earlier are enough names and enough examples to testify to having faith in God is worth it. And so he's like, listen, I could go through so many more. There are so many names I could do, but what more shall I say? The names I've already listed to you are a good representation of the faithfulness that he is calling them to. But then he gives this list. He doesn't go into detail about them. But he gives this list of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, and Samuel, which I find to be a bit interesting, because within this own list, we find each man battled against overwhelming odds, so that humanly speaking, there was little chance of them coming out on top. Their faith wasn't formality. It wasn't, we just need to have this. It was literally what they latched onto to survive. It meant real trust when the odds seemed stacked against them. Therefore, they are worthy examples to the original audience and you and I of men and women of faith. However, it's important to note that there were defects in the faith of all of them. All of them. The ones we got done talking about, and this list here. Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, and Samuel, and the rest of the prophets. Gideon hesitated and was slow to take up arms. Barak hesitated and went forward only when Deborah encouraged her, or him. Samson was addicted to women and was deceived by Delilah. Jephthah made a flippant and foolish vow that took the life of his own daughter. David committed adultery and murder. If you want more examples of it, you can go back to read their stories to see how their lives played themselves out. They had serious defects. In fact, John Calvin put it this way: in every saint, there is always to be found something reprehensible. Nevertheless, although faith may be imperfect and incomplete, it does not cease to be approved by God. So if you ever find yourself in a situation like, man, I'm just not worthy. I've gone too far. I've done too many bad things. This list is an example that God chases down even the worst of the worst. Not only chases them down, but decides to use them for his purpose and glory. And here's what I have realized. That the church is okay with that. The church overall is in fact, we tend to kind of like put on a pedestal someone who was the worst of the worst, found Jesus, and then became like a Sunday school teacher, pastor, whatever. Like, we love that story. We'll put them on platforms, they share your testimony, and they share all the wretched things they used to do, and then say, but then the grace of God found me and saved me. Church is great with that. What church struggles with is if your greatest failure or worst mistake is in front of you, not behind you. Now we have a problem. Because what happens is we're okay with post-Jesus failure or pre-Jesus failures. We're not okay with post-Jesus failures. And so people hide. They pretend. Because once you find Jesus, you're supposed to be perfect and whole. And I'm here to tell you that is as far from the biblical reality as it is. That Jesus sustains your mistakes and failures, or you through your mistakes and failures, no matter how broken you seem. And we see this in this instance. But look what God does with these individuals. Look at verse 33. It says this: who through faith conquered kingdoms, enforced justice, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the power of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, and were made strong out of weakness, became mighty in war, and put foreign armies to flight. Verse 35. Women received back their dead, that they might rise again at a better life. Man, I'm telling you what, if that's the ministry opportunity that we get to have, that's amazing. Can you imagine for a moment? If you got to experience some of the things that happen, that they enforced justice, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the power of fire, to be someone like Elijah, who called fire down from heaven to consume an altar that was filled with water. I can't even get clear water here. I'm like, God, we're putting people in this. You clear it up, can't you? Like, can you even imagine the ministry opportunities that they got to see and experience because of their feeble faith in a big God who remained faithful even through their own mistakes and failures? They saw some extraordinary things. Extraordinary. Like, that's the kind of ministry that we long for. In fact, people would say this: if this was happening, I'd believe. If we got to see this take place, then I would believe. Well, what's crazy is when Jesus walked this earth and started to do some of these miraculous things where people were raised from the dead, blind could see, lepers were healed. Guess who still didn't believe? The feeble-hearted man. So these aren't to initiate belief. These come out of a faith initiated by the grace and goodness of God into the hearts or into the lives of men and women who then start to see this pour out of them. They were made strong out of their weakness. Meaning their most weakest moments, God showed up. I just want that. Anyone ever have a week that seems pretty weak? Like, man, this was a struggle. You know, your weakness and my weakness becomes the stage for God's strength and glory to dance. It becomes an arena for him to show his goodness, to let you know you can't do this alone. That slaps the face of our American understanding that you can just do it. Try harder, make it happen, read the right book, get the right motivational speaker, and you've got this. I'm here to tell you, that's not the case. You and I can't do this alone. In fact, until we realize we are unbelievably weak, we won't realize how strong he is. And so that's what was going on. We have these lists of things that God accomplished through the faith of the Old Testament men and women. These are amazing real-life examples of ministry being done through the broken, the sinful, the imperfect, who put their faith and trust in a big God. But here's the problem. If it was to stop here, it would be a truncated understanding of what faith in God looks like. If we ended at verse 35, we would have a harmful and false pretense. If we did not read on, we would think that faith in God was just all about fires being quenched, swords being broken, lions being tamed. That's what we would think, but I need you to see what faith in God also looks like. And before I read it, please understand, during the time they would have heard this for the first time, they were facing persecution. I'll never forget the story that Judah Smith says on one of his messages. He mentioned when he was a youth pastor, he preached this message about being all in with Jesus. And it was a group of teenagers, and he was passionate. He said, you need to be all in for Jesus. And he does this altar call. This altar call, there's many people that came down, but there's one girl in particular that came down and says, I want to be all in for Jesus. He says, awesome. So they pray. She gives her life to Jesus. I believe she's around 15, 16 years old. She goes home. That night, while Judah Smith is at the house, he has a knock at the door. He goes to the door, and it's this girl who gave her life to Jesus with a suitcase. And he's like, yes? Well, you said if you wanted to go on for Jesus, and I wanted to go on for Jesus. But unfortunately, what that means for me, because I live in a Muslim home, is that my parents disowned me the moment I got home and kicked me out of the house. So I don't have anywhere to go. It's easy to be all in for Jesus in a culture where it's semi-acceptable. But to be all in for Jesus and it puts an X on you or a bullseye on you immediately becomes very difficult. In fact, where the Christian church is thriving is where it's facing the most persecution. Because when you say yes to Jesus, you have some skin in the game. Like for most of us, the worst thing that you'll face when you say yes to Jesus is getting baptized in dirty water. Is maybe some friends at school disowning you. That's not cool. Is maybe you having to tone it down a little bit because you don't want to upset someone in your workplace. The reality is the moment we say yes to Jesus, we have to understand there are some things that may come alongside of that will be difficult and hard. And it tells us that and reaffirms that in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 36. Look what men and women of faith had to endure. Others suffered mocking and flogging, and even chains and imprisonment. They were stoned. They were sawn in two. And they were killed with a sword. Now, I'll read on in a second. I want to highlight one of them. But we need to understand the reason why the writer is writing this to this group of people is because they're facing some similar persecution. And they're saying, listen, having faith in God may make circumstances and situations dark and heavy. But it's worth it. It's worth it. Being Solomon too? That sounds terrible. In fact, the historic tradition is that Isaiah the prophet was one of the ones Solomon too. I don't know if you know much about Isaiah's story. But he was called by God, who shall I send? Isaiah's like, send me. And then he realizes in the presence of the unadulterated gloriness of God, woe is me. And so God literally cleansed his lips to become his mouthpiece. So God cleanses the lips of Isaiah to be the mouthpiece to go out to preach the good news about the goodness of God. And here's what happens. God says, listen, here's how this is going to work. The people you speak to won't listen. They won't hear you. They won't believe you. It'll be hard. In fact, your ministry will all be about spitting in the wind. Who wants that? Can you imagine? That's it. All right, so here's how it works out. If you give your life to Jesus Christ, things will go awful for you. You'll try to spread the message and everyone will ignore you, laugh at you, mock you. I don't think many pastors would be like, sign me up for that one. But Isaiah was signed up for that, and that's what it was like. But he was as bold to continue his faith in the Lord that when it was the time for his death, he was Solomon too. I don't know about you, but that's enough to tell me there's something real about this. When you have men and women who are willing to endure such things. They were stoned, they were sawn too, they were killed with the sword. They went about in skins of sheep and goats, destitute, afflicted, mistreated, of whom the world was not worthy, wandering about in deserts, mountains, and in dens and caves of the earth. One commentator put it this way: if the account of faith were to stop before 36, it might leave us with the dangerously false impression that faith keeps us from suffering in this world. This is the kind of thing we often hear today, that if we only have enough faith, we will never be sick or poor or troubled in any way. However, verses 35 through 38 refute such thinking, telling us about others, that is, people who trusted God and yet were subjected to the greatest of trials. Theirs, however, was no less a triumphant faith, for it enabled them to honor God by faithfully enduring to the end. Once again, the author speaking to a group of people who believe in the sufficiency of Jesus Christ, his death, burial, and resurrection, and were facing some challenging things. Here's what it says at the end, 39. And all these, though commended through their faith, did not receive what was promised. Since God had provided something better for us, that apart from us, they should not be made perfect. Meaning that they endured all of these things, waiting on the promise. Not some of the promises. We already know earlier it says they obtained promises. They got certain things. They made it to the land. They had that land. They had kings. Like, things worked itself out with some promises that God offered. But the promise, Jesus, everything culminates in Jesus. They didn't get to see. Their lives and their minds were cut short before seeing the Messiah. See, we have the ability to read through their stories looking back to the cross. For them, they were anticipating, expecting the moment when God would show up, God with us, Emmanuel, who would be there to say, I have come to set things right. They heard about it from Isaiah. They heard about it from Hosea. They hear about all these things. And as they walk their faith out, their lives were cut short before the promise of Jesus. Yet even as their lives ended, God's faithfulness continued. And at the right time, God's Son, Jesus, came to fulfill the promise, listen, that was promised all the way back in Genesis chapter 3. All the way back. The first promise of the Messiah. And we get through all of these pages to finally realize Jesus Christ shows up on the scene, and he is the one that was promised. That the entire book of Hebrews speaks of better things in Christ. A better plan, a better priest, a better covenant, a better sacrifice, a better blood, a better home forever. That these heroes of faith were waiting to see all the things that are better. Things that can only be seen through faith in Jesus. And you and I have the opportunity to experience that. Yet our faith seems to still be weak. Okay, man, I just want a little more. In fact, if I could just have a genie in the bottle to make my life right and comfortable now, that would actually be more sufficient than Jesus. And I'm going to tell you that the only way you and I can stand before a holy, righteous God is through faith and trust in the one who gave it all for us, and that's Jesus. So I have 4 quick things. They're quick. That are vital for those of us in this room walking in faith. And it is incredibly timely for those who are going to make this public proclamation of their faith in Jesus through baptism in a little bit. You're going to go in dirty water and come out clean? Oh, here's number 1. Dependence on God is more important than our circumstances. Dependence on God is more important than whatever trial you're walking through. Don't let the trial you're walking through dictate your dependence on God. Thinking he must not be there, he must not be real, he must not be aware. Why would he allow me to walk through this? Our circumstances don't dictate our faith in him. Our faith in him is what allows us to navigate our circumstances. Understanding that although I can be pressed down, I won't be crushed. Although these things may be caving in on me, I know I am more than a conqueror through Jesus Christ. So we know that. That's why Hebrews chapter 6 says that knowing that God is unchanging is the sure anchor for our soul. That although life around you is fading and your body is withering, your soul has an anchor in the immutable, unchangeable creator of the universe through the perfect work of Jesus. It's beautiful. Our dependence on God is more important than our circumstances. Number 2 is this: that faith and trust in God is sufficient as we wait on God's promises. As you know, none of us wait well. I was driving home last night, and these 2 cars on the highway who were merging on the highway. The one car thought the other car was going pretty slow. It's like, I need to get on the highway faster than you. And so he was flashing his lights behind him. And the guy behind him, like, just at his own pace, got on the highway. And this guy went around him, got in front of him. We're on the highway. I'm watching this, enjoying this moment. And this guy got in front of him and was slamming on his brakes to slow him down. I'm like, wait, I thought you were in a hurry to go somewhere. What are you doing? And so then this guy speeds around him. I'm like, this is going to get interesting. So I backed away a little bit just in case it got crazy. And then they were causing each other to merge off of the road. I'm like, you guys are insane. Like, I have road rage, but I want to live. Like, you were in that much of a hurry that this is what happened? And so finally, the guy who was the slow one got from the other one, and he was literally flashing his lights for the next 5 minutes as we're going down the road. I'm like, well, you're resilient. I give you that. Persistent little guy. Either way, we don't wait well. What you and I need to know is that the goodness of God displayed in Jesus Christ and our faith and trust in that is enough and sufficient as we wait on God to reveal more of his plan to us. We want God to give us everything so that we have faith. And I'm saying, have faith that God gave us enough in Jesus so that as other things unfold, we can be patient. Listen, if God only gave you Jesus, he was good. If that's all you and I got was Jesus, he's been good to us. We need to start there. Number 3 is this. Danielle, you can work your way forward. Genuine faith is evidenced by endurance. Not perfect, but lasting. Jesus would say it this way. He gives this parable of some seed being sowed. And in this parable, some seed that was sowed was choked out by the vines and the thorns, and they weren't lasting. They showed fruit for a little while, but then they withered away. As I met with the people getting baptized earlier, someone asked me a question about how many people that I've baptized around that number, and I really don't know. Quite a few. But then I followed it up with this. I know a lot of pastors celebrate like this big moment, and will say it's better than Super Bowl touchdown, your team winning. It's better than Ohio State making that kick. It's better. My bad. Like they're going to redeem. We're good. Anyways, it's better than all of those moments. Like we'll say that. We're about to worship and celebrate that because it is like celebrating a life that was saved by the grace and mercies of Jesus is amazing. However, what I've realized is that so often when people give their lives to Jesus and then get baptized, I think the enemy works a little harder. And people start to leave the church and leave the faith. And I don't like that. So I'm hesitant to do the baptisms. I don't want the amount of people that get wet in this tub to be a reflection that God is moving. Because if we start to think that that's how God moves, then we miss the point. God moved by sending his son Jesus to do for you and I what we could not do for ourselves. And that Jesus Christ defeated death, rose up, and went into heaven. And is at the throne, seated there, intermediating for you and I. That the move of God is that he is our advocate right now. That when we are wayward, he chases us down. That when we mess up, he comes to our aid. Like Jesus Christ is enough. And if we start to think it's about the things we see, we've missed it. It's about the things that he's already done and that he is doing in the hearts and minds of the people in this room. That was a decent clap. It's a little weak, but we're good. What I realized is we've started to think that church is about the things we get to see being done. And now we show up and get excited when we see more things like that. And I'm saying that faith in God tells you and I, we walk in here excited and ready to celebrate because God has been working and continues to work and will always work. So we need that. My last thing is this. Faith is initiated and strengthened by knowing rightly the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus, who is the promise. That what initiates the faith is Jesus. What strengthens your faith is Jesus. Understanding that there is no greater promise than him. There's nothing greater you can receive than him. Like I spend my career doing this, telling people that everything else weighed out against Jesus is lacking. Everything. Fame, money, reputation, sports, work, climbing the ladder, sex, drugs, all of these things. Anything that we think we want here and now is lacking when it comes to the promise we get in Jesus. And so many of us spend most of our time chasing all of these things to the moment where we never actually bow our knee to the one who is worthy.
Thank you for listening to Crosslink Community Church Podcast. If you would like more information about our church, please visit our website at www.crosslinkchurch.com or join us in person on Sunday mornings at 10:20 a.m. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast so you don't miss a single message, and share with a friend. Thank you again for listening.